Well, it's warmer here in the sun. I'm not sure if the lighting is better or worse. A little bit of a shadow on my eyes, I guess, from my hat, but I gotta have that on because the sun's right up there over my head. We're ready for chapter 13 of The Lion's Paw by Rob White. The little drawing at the beginning is just some seashells. And we're getting along here. Not a whole lot left of this book. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. Thanks again to the folks at AW Ink. Remember that you can order from them a copy of The Lion's Paw, a new edition, and it's available at www.thelionspaw.org, www.thelionspaw.org. And here's chapter 13. The search for the lion's paw went on day after day. The brassy sun hammered down on them, burning their knees and forearms and the backs of their necks to a deep mahogany, peeling their noses and foreheads and the backs of their knees. Nick's collection of shells piled higher and higher in the cardboard box, but they found no lion's paws, not even a broken piece of one. Each morning after they had had breakfast and then made everything ship-shape below and topside, they would row ashore in the dinghy, secure it to a palm tree, and walk across the seaward beach. As two of them swam along, one would search the piles of shells on the sand. Then the one on land would put on his face mask, and one of the others would come out on land. Steadily for hundreds of yards each day, they worked their way down the long, curving, and deserted beach of Captiva Island. In the late afternoon, they would stop, put up a marker to show where to start in the morning, and go back to the sloop. While Penny and Nick cooked supper, Ben worked on the engine. When he got the intake water line off, he found a lot of corrosion in the jacket, so he took that off. When he got that off, he found a lot of carbon in the head, so he tackled that. After 4 days, he almost had the engine taken apart. Each one of them gradually felt the feeling of defeat growing. They each kept their feelings secret from one another, but as the days went by and they didn't find the shell, they began to give up hope. One morning, when they got to the beach, they found the Gulf so muddy that even in the shallow water, they couldn't see the bottom through the face mask. "Must be a storm out there somewhere," Ben said. "I hope it doesn't hit us." "What would it do to us?" Nick asked. "The boat's sheltered all right, so it wouldn't do any damage," Ben said. "We'd just lose a day or so, unless we wanted to hunt in a pouring rain and a yowling wind." "You mean we'd just have to stay on the boat all day?" Nick asked. Ben nodded. "I wouldn't mind," Nick said. "I'm getting a little tired of hunting all day long every day." It was the first time anyone had said what each one of them was thinking. They were all getting tired. Ben looked at Nick and then at Penny. Ben didn't want to give up. The thought of it scared him, but he knew that Penny and Nick were discouraged and that if they didn't find one soon, it would be bad. Ben remembered the night coming down the canal. His father would come back when they found a lion's paw. The belief in that was still strong. In fact, it had grown stronger as each day passed. "Maybe a rest would do us all good," Ben said. "In a few days, we'll have to go for provisions anyway, so we'll take the day off, sail up to Boca Grande or someplace, get some food and fresh water, and then sail back. We'll fish." "Oh boy," Nick said. "When?" "Well, what's the food situation, Penny?" Ben asked. "Good," she said. "We won't need anything for at least 2 days." "All right, we'll hunt for 2 more days and then take a day off," Ben said. "I'll be able to see better," Nick said. "I'll just rest my eyes all that day, and then when we start again, they'll be much brighter." All 3 of them searched the beach that day, and by afternoon the wind was blowing strong out of the northwest, and the muddy waves were breaking and foaming far up the beach. Here's a picture of them searching on the beach. They rolled a lot of horseshoe crabs up on their backs, and Nick began collecting them. but they were heavy, so he dropped them after a while and just collected shells. On the way back to the boat, Ben said, "This weather doesn't look very good for shelling or fishing." "That's all right," Nick said. "If we can't go anywhere, I can spread out my collection and see what I've got." "You know," Penny said as she walked along, "I haven't thought about running away and all that for a long time." "Neither have I," Ben said. "I guess Uncle Pete has given up on us by now, don't you?" "How long has it been?" Penny asked. Ben laughed. "I haven't got the faintest idea. Seems like years since we shoved off that night." "It certainly does." "Anyway," Penny said, "I don't think anyone is looking for us anymore. Everybody's forgotten about us." "We'll turn on the radio tonight and see if they still talk about us," Ben said. "But not for long, because it'll run down the batteries and I haven't got the engine fixed yet." How much have you got to do?" "If we have to stay aboard tomorrow, I'll finish it," Ben said. "I don't want to go up to Boca Grande with it out of commission." "Look at all the seagulls," Nick said. "I never saw so many." Ben shook his head. "We're going to have some real weather," he said. "Those are ocean-going gulls over there. When they come into shore, it means the weather is really stinking." "What would happen to them if they stayed out?" Nick asked. "I don't know," Ben said. "Dad and I were out in a real howler one time. The wind was blowing 50 miles an hour, blowing so hard it held the waves down and just smoked them, blowing the foam off so that everything looked gray. I saw some gulls then. They were just sitting on the water going up and down with the waves. Didn't seem to bother them much. But I've always noticed that when the weather's making up, most gulls come into shore." Then, as they came out of the narrow shell road, they saw the man. They were surprised to see him because it was the first person they had seen since they had been on the island. But none of them thought of him as being dangerous or as being a threat. They had forgotten how it felt to be always hunted. The man was very tall and skinny as a rail, with long, bony arms and a thin chest under his overall straps. He was so thin they could see all his ribs. He had a fish net folded over his shoulder, the cork floats and lead weights flapping. Ben nodded and they all said, "Good evening," and started to walk on across the road. The man moved a little and blocked the road and blocked their way. The man moved a little and blocked their way. "Wait a minute," he said. He had a very unpleasant voice. His face was long and thin as the rest of him, and his nose was so thin Nick wondered how he could breathe through it. His little eyes were set close to the nose so that his face looked like some sort of a bird's face, and his eyes were hard and glittery like a bird's. "What you kids doing around here?" the man asked. "Just looking for seashells," Ben said. "Where'd you come from?" "Fort Myers," Ben said. "Come on the ferry?" Ben shook his head. "We came over in a boat." "Whose boat?" Ben felt his anger packing up inside him. "Mr. Jenkins," he said. "Never heard of no Jenkins from around here. I think you're lying." "What for?" Ben asked. "Can't people come over here and look for seashells?" The man shifted the fish net on his shoulder. "I don't see that you got any shells," he said. Nick held up his sock full of shells and shook it up and down. "You can't see very well," Nick said. The man stooped down so that his face was on a level with Nick's. "Keep your trap shut, bub," he said. Ben stepped over beside Nick. "Come on, let's go," he said. As Ben started to walk across the road, the man put his hand on Ben's chest and shoved him backwards a step or two. "Now just hold on," the man said. "When I say you can go, you can go. Understand?" Ben put his hands in his pockets and doubled up his fist. The man pointed a bony finger almost into Penny's eye. "What's your name?" he demanded. Penny's mouth opened, but Ben said first, "Her name's Ann Jackson." The man glared at Ben. "Who asked you?" Ben went on. "His is Bill Jackson and mine's Charlie Jackson." The man spat a stream of yellow juice out of his mouth, and it dribbled a little down the corner and into the stubble of his whiskers. He began to rock back and forth on his heels. "I think your name is Sturgis," he said, "and I think these two brats is orphans." Ben felt something cold grip his heart. He shook his head slowly. "Our name is Jackson," he said. Around the bend in the road, a ramshackle Ford truck rattled up to them. A man stuck his head out and looked at them. "What's going on?" the driver asked. "I think these kids is them runaways from the East Coast," the thin man said. "But they say their name is Jackson." "Maybe it is. How would they get here from the East Coast?" the driver asked. "Come on, get in or we'll miss the ferry." The man threw the net in the back of the truck and started to get in. "If these is them runaways, Joe," he said, "you're just costing me $500. Get in, the driver said. "Ferry's leaving in 5 minutes. The thin man got in, and as the truck drove away, they saw him lean out and look back at him. They stood silently in the road for a few minutes, and at last Ben said, "I guess we were wrong." Penny nodded. "They're still chasing us." Penny, she said. "What was that he spat out of his mouth?" Nick asked. "Tobacco juice," Ben said. "Come on." "Are we going to have to go?" Penny asked. "I don't know," Ben said, "but we've got to be more careful. Tonight we'll pull the sloop in closer to the trees." "If we have to go, is there any other place where we can find a lion's paw?" Penny asked. "I don't think so. I never heard of any," Ben said. "The next man we see like that," Nick said, "we'll jump on him. Ben, you get him on top. Penny'll get his middle, and I'll get his feet. I'll bite his leg off." "Boy," Ben said, "I felt like hitting that thin drink of water when he called me a liar." Ben swung his fist in a short arc. Then in a low voice he said, "I wish my dad had heard that. He would have hit him just once. Just one time." They rode in silence out to the sloop, and Ben immediately went below and brought up a long telescope. Resting it on the gallows frame, he began scanning the far end of the island. "There's the ferry," he said, "heading for Punta Rasa. The truck's on it." Penny sighed. "At least he won't bother us tonight." Ben shut the telescope and put it back into its leather case. "I don't think he'll bother us anymore," he said slowly. "He probably won't even come back here again. They didn't have any fish, did they?" "I don't think so," Penny said. "There wasn't anything but a net in the back of the truck." "If they don't catch fish over here, what's the use of coming back?" Ben asked. "We'll be more careful, but I don't think we'll have to worry about that beanpole anymore." "Didn't he look like a bird?" Nick asked. "Mean looking," Penny said. Ben went down and tapped the barometer. The needle jumped downward. "We've got about one more day for the beach," Ben said. "Then it'll be blowing so hard the birds will be walking." In the morning, before they rowed ashore, Ben locked all the hatches securely, battened down the topside, turned the cushions up in the cockpit in case of rain. It was an ugly gray morning with the wind blowing half a gale out of the northwest. Old fronds from the coconut trees thrashed around and were torn off. The tall grass was lying half flat. On the beach, the sea was coming in on great brown rollers so that the whole length of the beach was shrouded in a smoke of foam, and there was a steady, thunderous booming. "This is what tears the shells loose and brings them ashore," Ben said as they started the slow, head-down, stooped-over walking in search of a lion's paw. Nick had his old sock and was, by choice, walking the beach nearest the sea. Penny had the middle strip and Ben the inland edge. It was hardest for Nick because he was continually being threatened by the breakers. By the time they stopped to eat lunch, the weather was foul and the sky hanging down gray just above them. The wind so strong they almost had to yell to talk. They were all soaked to the skin from the flying spray, and the wind was cold. But they went on, Something was driving Ben, some knowledge he had that he couldn't understand or express. He just knew that they had to keep on searching until the last minute. They found nothing. Of the millions of new shells washed up by the storm, no lion's paws were recognized. Nick's sock was overflowing when they finally gave up and left the beach. They didn't talk much as they walked across the island, for they were discouraged and depressed. By the time they got to the bay where the sloop was, it was almost dark. Ben rowed the dinghy in silence, and they climbed out one by one and lifted the dinghy up and turned it upside down over the cabin skylight. Penny went aft to get the lashings for it, and as she stepped down into the cockpit, a voice said, "Howdy!" It paralyzed Penny for a second, and then she screamed, "Ben!" The thin man got slowly up from where he had been sitting in the cockpit. Ben and Nick came running aft and then stopped short when they saw him. The sloop swung a few degrees and showed the man's boat tied up astern. "Just the way I figured it," the man said. "You painted her black, didn't you? And changed the name." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ben said, "and you better get off this boat." The man took a step toward Ben. "Do you want to get some teeth smacked out?" Ben didn't move. "My father will be here soon," he said. "Yeah, listen," the man said, coming closer to Ben. "I know all about your father. He's dead. I know all about you too, bub. Your name ain't no more Jackson than mine is." Nick gripped the sock full of shells and advanced toward the man. Ben held him back with an arm across his chest. "You've made a mistake," Ben said to the man quietly. "Now please get off this boat." "Mind your talk," the man snapped. "I'll get off when I'm plumb good and ready. Any more back talk from you and I'll smack you down, understand?" Ben felt desperate and helpless. His voice broke a little as he said, "My father will throw you off this boat when he gets here." "Your father ain't throwing nothing nowhere 'cause he's dead as a mackerel. Now you listen. I done got the number of this boat off the Carlin, and I'm going across the bay and check it, just to be sure this here boat's the Heart of Lee like I think it is. After I do that, I'll telegraph that feller on the East Coast. Then I'm coming back here and stay until he gets here and gives me the reward. No use you're trying to sneak out of here, because if you sail out tonight, you'll get on a reef and end up drowned. And don't try hiding. There's no place on this little island where I can't find you, understand?" The man hitched up his overalls and stepped out of the cockpit. "Lion's paw," he said, his voice sneering. He climbed down into the boat, started the engine, and chugged out of the little bay. They stood in the cockpit and watched as his boat began slapping into the little waves of the sheltered harbor. In their silence, they listened to the wind now, whining through the rigging. Listen to the dry, roaring sound it made in the palm fronds and over the grass. Listen to the constant far booming of the surf against the seaward side of the island. "I was wrong," Ben said quietly. He came back. Penny nodded. "Can't we get away?" Nick asked. "We gotta try," Ben said, "but I'm scared. The only thing we can do is try to beat our way out through the pass, then get off this lee shore as far as we can and heave to." "Couldn't we go to another island and hide?" Penny asked. Ben shook his head. "Not in this storm at night. We'd hit a reef, and in 5 minutes this boat would be nothing but splinters. We'd drown." "But can he get back through the storm?" Penny asked. "Those fishing boats can live through anything. His boat doesn't draw any more than a few inches of water. Goes right over reefs that we'd pile up on. He'll be back tonight." "And the engine isn't fixed either," Nick said. "I know it," Ben said. He looked at Penny and Nick in the gathering darkness. "I want you to know what you're in for," he said quietly. "If we stay here, we'll get caught. As soon as he looks up our number in the yacht register, he'll know for sure who we are. I'll have to go back to Uncle Pete and let him sell the boat, and you'll have to go back to the orphanage. On the other hand, if we try to make the pass, we may hit a reef. If we got through the pass, I think we could get sea room and be all right. What do you want to do? Stay or go? Penny? Penny rubbed her finger around and around the glass of her face mask. Let's go, Nick said. Penny nodded. All right, Ben said. We try for the pass. We can make it all right, Nick said. We're good sailors now. I hope so, Ben said. I hate to have a dumb plow jockey like that mess us up. If that guy had any sense, he'd have made us go with him, at least one of us. It burns me up to get caught by that stupid string bean. I don't guess we'll ever find a lion's paw now, Penny said. Nope. Well, let's get on the ball. Nick, please go below and bring up that storm jib in the sail locker. It's got a tag on it with red letters, Storm Jib. Aye, aye, Nick said. On his way through the main cabin, he emptied his sock full of shells into the box with the others. Topside, while Ben got the sails ready, Penny and Nick closed and battened all the hatches, put a cap on the Charlie Noble, took all loose gear below. The dinghy was upside down on the main cabin skylight. It was dark when they got sail on her and weighed anchor. And that's the end of chapter 13.